It was one of those afternoons when the whole city seemed to be in a hurry. The streets were full of cars honking, people rushing around with shopping bags, and the small grocery store on the corner was no exception. The glass doors kept sliding open every few seconds as customers walked in. The sound of footsteps, murmurs, and the occasional laugh filled the air. Inside, the aisles were crowded, baskets overflowing with fruits, bread, and cartons of milk. A tired-looking cashier sat behind the counter, scanning items quickly and shouting prices louder than necessary. The store smelled of freshly baked bread, mixed with the faint scent of cleaning detergent, and the overhead lights gave everything a bright but slightly harsh glow. The line at the counter grew longer and longer. People stood shifting their weight from one foot to the other, some tapping their fingers on their carts, others scrolling through their phones to pass the time. There was a restless energy in the air. Everyone wanted to get done quickly and go home. The cashier, a man in his mid-30s, had already been working for hours without a proper break. His forehead glistened with sweat, and his patience was wearing thin. Each customer that came forward seemed like just another task he wanted to push aside as fast as possible. Among the customers stood a woman who seemed a little out of place in the busy rush. She held a small basket with only a few items: bread, a bottle of milk, and some vegetables. Her clothes were simple, her hands looked tired, and her eyes had a quiet sadness. She walked slowly to the counter, her body language almost apologetic, as if she didn't want to disturb anyone. The people behind her sighed loudly, clearly annoyed at the thought of having to wait even a minute longer. The cashier began scanning her items with sharp movements. The beeping sound of the machine echoed loudly in the silence of the store. When it was time to pay, the woman reached into her bag and pulled out an old wallet. Its edges were torn and the zipper was half broken. She opened it carefully and began counting coins one by one. The sound of metal clinking against the counter made the line grow even more impatient. The people waiting behind her exchanged looks, rolling their eyes and whispering to each other. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she searched for the exact amount. She looked embarrassed, her head bent down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. It was clear that she didn't have much money, and she wanted to make sure she paid the right amount. Her fingers brushed through every pocket of the wallet, picking out coins of different sizes, slowly arranging them on the counter. Every second felt longer than it really was, and the pressure in the room grew heavier. The cashier drummed his fingers on the counter, his jaw tightening with each passing moment. His eyes flicked to the line of waiting customers, then back to the woman who was still counting carefully. His frustration was building like a boiling pot of water, and the people behind her were not helping. Some sighed dramatically, others whispered complaints, and one man muttered under his breath, "Come on already!" The atmosphere turned tense like a storm waiting to break. The woman noticed the tension but didn't speak. She only tried harder to count quickly, though her hands were shaking even more. Her face flushed with embarrassment and she bit her lip nervously. She knew she was holding everyone up, and the weight of their stares felt unbearable. She wished she could disappear, but she also knew she needed the food she was buying. For her, these simple items were important, perhaps for her children or family waiting at home, but to everyone else in that moment she was just a delay. As the coins clattered onto the counter, one of them rolled to the edge and fell to the floor with a loud ringing sound. The woman gasped softly and bent down quickly to pick it up. The cashier groaned and the people behind her shook their heads. The air was heavy with impatience and the woman's quiet struggle stood out like a small, fragile flame in a room full of cold wind. In that crowded grocery store, with its buzzing lights, impatient customers, and an exhausted cashier, the scene was set for something more. What looked like just another busy afternoon was about to turn into a moment that none of the people there would ever forget. The woman stood at the counter with her small basket now empty, her items placed neatly in a thin plastic bag, but her struggle was not yet over. She held her old wallet in both hands, her fingers nervously flicking through it, looking for every last coin she had. Her face looked pale, her eyes were lowered, and she moved slowly as if the weight of the whole world rested on her shoulders. The line of customers behind her shifted uncomfortably, and the air inside the store was heavy with impatience. She began pulling out small coins, laying them one by one on the counter. The sound of the coins hitting the surface was sharp in the silence of the room. Some were big, some were tiny, and she tried to arrange them in neat little piles. Her hands shook as she counted, sometimes losing track and starting over again. She whispered the numbers to herself under her breath, trying to keep calm. But the more she felt the eyes of the people behind her, the more nervous she became. The customers were restless, some sighed loudly, others crossed their arms and tapped their feet against the floor. A young man with headphones pulled them out and shook his head in frustration. A mother with 2 kids looked down at her children, then glanced at the woman with irritation. A businessman in a neat suit checked his watch again and again, muttering that he was going to be late. The tension grew stronger with each second. It was as if everyone in that line was united in their silent anger against one struggling woman. The cashier's face hardened. He was already tired from his long shift. His back ached from standing and his mind was full of irritation. He had seen this kind of situation before, but today his patience was thinner than ever. He tapped the counter with his pen, glanced at the clock on the wall and let out an exaggerated sigh. His jaw clenched as he watched her count slowly. Almost painfully, coin by coin, he wanted the line to move faster. But she was moving at the pace of a child learning to add numbers for the first time. The woman felt the pressure. She could feel the burning stares from behind her. She wished she could disappear into the ground. Her cheeks turned red, her throat tightened, but she continued to count because she had no other choice. Every coin mattered, every single one was important. She didn't have the luxury of pulling out a credit card or tossing a few extra bills on the counter. This was all she had, and she needed it to cover the cost of her food. One of the coins slipped from her trembling hand, rolled across the counter and fell onto the floor with a loud metallic ring. The sound echoed in the room and several customers groaned. A man behind her muttered angrily, "Oh, come on." A woman rolled her eyes so hard that even the cashier noticed. The poor woman bent down quickly, nearly dropping her wallet as she reached for the runaway coin. Her hands shook even more when she stood back up, and now her eyes were wet with unshed tears. The room felt colder, harsher. The lights above hummed loudly, and every sound seemed magnified. The shuffle of feet, the clink of coins, the annoyed whispers, and the heavy sighs all pressed down on her. She was just trying to buy a few basic things, but at that moment, it felt like she was being judged by the entire world. She clutched her wallet tighter, her lips trembling as she whispered the numbers again, willing her shaking hands to stay steady. There was a young boy in the line with his mother. He tugged at her sleeve and asked in a low voice why the lady was taking so long. The mother hushed him quickly, but the boy's innocent words hung in the air, highlighting the truth that everyone was thinking but not saying out loud. The woman heard it and her heart sank even lower. She felt smaller and smaller, almost invisible, yet painfully exposed. Finally, she pushed the last coin across the counter. Her total was barely enough, and for a moment she held her breath, afraid the cashier would say it wasn't sufficient. But the machine beeped, and the amount was accepted. The cashier grabbed the coins with quick, irritated fingers, his expression stiff. He bagged her items without a smile, without a word of kindness, and shoved the bag toward her. His tone was clipped and impatient, like someone trying to get rid of an unwanted task. The woman reached for the bag with trembling hands, whispered a soft thank you that no one bothered to acknowledge, and held the thin plastic tightly against her chest. Her shoulders hunched as if she wanted to shield herself from all the coldness around her. The people behind her pushed their carts forward eagerly, glad the delay was over. For them, it was just a small inconvenience in their day, but for her, it was a moment that would linger in her heart like a painful bruise. The busy store, the impatient customers, and the tired cashier all carried on as if nothing had happened. But in that tiny moment, a story of quiet struggle had unfolded, unseen and unappreciated by most. What seemed like a small scene of a woman fumbling with her wallet was, in reality, a heavy chapter in her life, and though no one realized it yet, this was only the beginning of something that would soon take an unexpected turn. The moment the woman finally finished paying, the silence in the store felt heavy, but it did not last long. The cashier, who had been holding back his irritation, suddenly snapped. His voice rose above the hum of the crowded store. Sharp and cutting, he leaned forward slightly and barked at the woman. "Can you not waste everyone's time? Hurry up next time." The words came out fast, bitter, and full of frustration. The sound of his yell cut through the air like a knife. The customers who were whispering before now fell completely silent. All eyes turned toward the counter. Some widened in surprise. Others narrowed in annoyance, but most simply stared. The woman froze in her place, her hand still holding the plastic bag. Her shoulders sank even lower and her face turned bright red. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She lowered her gaze again, her grip on the bag tightening as though she was clinging to it for strength. The cashier did not stop, his anger spilling out like water from a broken jar. He shook his head and muttered, "Some people just don't care about others. They come here unprepared." Wasting everyone's time, his voice carried across the store, loud enough for everyone in the line to hear clearly. The woman's eyes filled with tears, her chin trembled, but she said nothing. She did not fight back, did not argue. She simply stood there quietly absorbing the humiliation. Her silence made the whole scene more heartbreaking. It was as if she had no voice, no shield to protect her from the harsh words being thrown at her. The people behind her shifted uncomfortably. Some glanced at each other, unsure of what to do. A few nodded slightly, as if agreeing with the cashier, thinking it was indeed too slow. Others frowned, guilt flashing in their eyes, because deep down, they knew the woman was only struggling, not trying to delay anyone, but no one spoke. No one stepped forward to defend her. The crowd stayed still. Caught between sympathy and selfishness, the cashier slammed the drawer shut with more force than necessary. The sound echoed loudly, startling even the children in line. He threw the receipt onto the counter without looking at the woman. His face was flushed with anger, his eyes hard. To him, she was just another difficult customer, someone who had made his long day even worse. He wanted her gone quickly so the line could move on, so he could feel some relief. The woman picked up her receipt slowly, her fingers brushing against the rough paper. She whispered another thank you, her voice so low it almost vanished into the air. But the cashier ignored it. He had already moved on, turning to the next customer with the same irritated tone. The woman turned to leave, her step small and hesitant. Each movement showed the weight of the humiliation she carried, like a heavy bag on her back. A young man in line shook his head, whispering under his breath. That was too much, but he did not speak louder. A mother hushed her children, who asked why the man was shouting. An older lady sighed deeply, her face full of pity. The room was full of judgment, but still nobody stepped in. Nobody had the courage to stop the cruelty unfolding right in front of them. The woman's eyes were glassy as she walked slowly toward the door. She tried to keep her head down, but the sting of shame burned her cheeks. Her heart beat painfully fast, and her throat ached from holding back her tears. She had only come for bread, milk, and vegetables, but she was leaving with something heavier than her small grocery bag. She was leaving with the memory of being yelled at in front of strangers. The store itself felt colder now. The bright lights above seemed too harsh. The cheerful posters on the wall advertising discounts looked out of place. Everything felt awkward and uncomfortable. A few customers shuffled their feet. Some looked away, pretending to be distracted by their phones or carts. But the image of the cashier yelling and the woman shrinking under his words hung in the air, lingering like a bad smell even though the scene lasted only a few minutes. It felt much longer for the woman. Each second had stretched into eternity. Each coin she had counted, each sigh she had heard, and finally, each word shouted at her had burned into her memory. She would carry it with her. Long after she left the store at that moment, no one knew that something unexpected was about to happen. A quiet presence in the line, someone who had been watching everything closely, was about to step forward. The tension in the store was thick, but it was not the end of the story. The outburst had shaken the room, but it would not be the final note. Something powerful was waiting just around the corner, ready to change everything. The moment the cashier's harsh words filled the air, the energy of the entire store shifted. The usual noise of people chatting and shuffling their carts faded, and instead there was a heavy silence. It was the kind of silence that made everyone's chest feel tight. The woman stood frozen at the counter, her hand gripping the plastic bag so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She lowered her head, her shoulders bent forward as if she wanted to make herself invisible. Her lips pressed together, trembling. Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall in front of so many strangers. She had been embarrassed enough already. Each second felt like a spotlight was shining on her. Every face in the store seemed to be watching, judging, whispering. She wanted nothing more than to escape, to run out into the open air and hide from the stares. The people in line felt the shift too. Nobody was speaking now. A mother with her children hugged them closer, as if to protect them from the harshness they had just witnessed. A man in a business suit checked his watch but did not look directly at the woman. A teenager with headphones pulled them out slowly. Sensing something unusual was happening, the entire store seemed to be holding its breath. The cashier himself looked annoyed, but after his outburst, even he realized the room had changed. His voice had echoed too loudly, and the words had hit harder than he expected. He looked down at the register, avoiding eye contact with the woman, pretending he was simply doing his job, but the damage was already done. His voice still lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. The woman finally took a step back, clutching her bag against her chest. Her movements were shaky, her body weak from the emotional blow. She whispered one last thank you, though her voice cracked and broke halfway through. Nobody answered. The cashier ignored it. The customers kept still, and she began walking toward the exit. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if her shoes were filled with stones. The silence was unbearable. The sound of her footsteps echoed too loudly in the store, bouncing off the walls and into the ears of everyone watching. The plastic bag rustled with each movement, the thin handles cutting into her fingers. Her breathing was shallow, almost like she was afraid to make a sound. She felt every eye still on her back, even though some people had turned away, pretending to look at the magazines or the snacks stacked near the counter. But what she did not know was that someone in the line was watching closely. Not with judgment, not with impatience, but with quiet attention. He had been standing a few places behind, tall, calm, and unbothered by the delay. His eyes followed the woman's slow walk to the door. His expression was thoughtful, gentle, and unlike the others, filled with empathy. While everyone else looked away, he kept watching, sensing that this moment was bigger than it seemed. The woman adjusted the bag on her arm, almost dropping it as she reached the door. Her hand still shook from the humiliation. Her face burned from the memory of being shouted at. She pushed the door with her shoulder, the glass moving slowly as if even the store itself didn't want to let her leave. Outside, the world went on as normal. Cars honked in the distance. The afternoon sun cast shadows on the street. But inside the store, time felt suspended. The people in line shifted again, but no one spoke. It was as if they all knew something had gone wrong, but they were too afraid or too indifferent to admit it. A few people looked ashamed, their eyes soft with regret, while others still wore annoyance on their faces as if blaming the woman for the tension. Yet no one had said a word to comfort her. No one had offered a hand. And that silence was louder than the cashier's yell. The store's atmosphere was no longer just busy or impatient. It had become heavy, awkward, and full of unspoken emotions. The woman's quiet suffering had left a mark, and everyone felt it, though they tried to brush it off. Some people fidgeted, others cleared their throats, but the uneasiness did not leave. The cashier himself avoided looking up, focusing on the next customer with robotic movements. His earlier confidence had melted into guilt he didn't want to admit. At that moment, the tension in the room felt like a stretched rubber band, ready to snap. Something was missing, a voice that could cut through the silence, a presence that could restore balance. Nobody realized it yet, but that voice was standing right there in the line, waiting for the right moment to speak. The woman was almost at the door now, her back hunched, her steps unsteady. She looked like a shadow of herself, smaller, weaker, and almost invisible. And just when it seemed like the story would end in silence, something was about to happen. A calm strength was preparing to rise, one that would turn the entire situation around. The heavy atmosphere would not last much longer, because a single line spoken with kindness and authority was about to change everything. The woman was only a few steps from the door when the air inside the store shifted again. People were still quiet, but there was a sense that something was about to happen. In the line, a tall man with gentle eyes had been watching everything without saying a word. He was dressed simply in jeans and a jacket, and there was nothing flashy about him. Yet his presence carried a calmness that stood out from the frustration around him. This man was Keanu Reeves, though most people in the store had not even noticed him at first. He was not the type to draw attention. He waited patiently in line like everyone else, holding a small basket with just a few things. He had watched the woman's struggle, seen her shaking hands, heard the cashier's yell, and noticed the silence of the people who stood by. His heart grew heavier with every passing second. He knew he could not just let her leave like that, carrying not only her groceries, but also the weight of shame and humiliation. He had seen how her spirit had shrunk under the cruel words. He had seen the way she tried to make herself small, as if she did not deserve to be there. And he had seen the faces of the others, Caught between guilt and selfishness, frozen in silence, Keanu took a step forward, calm and steady. He was taller than most of the people in line, and his movement drew quiet attention. A few customers turned to look at him. Wondering what he was about to do, the cashier glanced up, his eyes briefly meeting Keanu's before flicking back down nervously. The woman, who was almost at the door, did not even realize someone was about to speak for her. The tension in the store was thick. It clung to the walls, the counters, the very air everyone was breathing. Every person there felt it, the weight of the moment. Keanu's expression remained soft, but his eyes were firm. He did not look angry. He did not look impatient, but there was a quiet authority in the way he carried himself. It was the kind of authority that didn't come from power or position, but from kindness, from the respect he naturally inspired. He gently set his basket down on the floor and stepped out of the line. His movements were not rushed, not aggressive. They were slow and deliberate, the kind of actions that made people stop and pay attention. A murmur spread through the line as more people noticed who he was. Some gasped softly, whispering to each other, realizing they were standing in the presence of a famous actor. But even those who didn't recognize him felt the pull of his calm energy. He walked toward the counter, not looking at anyone else, only at the cashier who had shouted. His footsteps were steady, almost too quiet for the moment, yet they echoed in the silence of the store. The cashier stiffened, his body tensing as Keanu came closer. He did not know what to expect. The other customers leaned slightly forward, their curiosity stronger than their impatience now. The woman stopped at the door and turned her head slightly. Confused by the sudden hush that had fallen behind her, she saw a tall figure moving toward the counter, but she could not believe her eyes. Her heart skipped, her breath caught. Was that really him, or was her tired mind playing tricks on her? She blinked quickly, and yes, it was truly Keanu Reeves walking calmly, gracefully, toward the very place she had just stood. He did not rush to confront, he did not shout back. Instead, he simply arrived at the counter, his presence filling the space. Everyone could feel it, like a ripple spreading across water. The cashier tried to look busy, pretending to scan an item, but his hands fumbled slightly. He could not ignore the calm figure standing in front of him. The room waited, every person holding their breath, wondering what he was going to say. Keanu's voice, when it finally came, was soft but clear. He did not raise it, yet it carried across the store easily. His words had weight, not because they were loud, but because they were true. He spoke not only to the cashier, but to everyone in that room. Though his eyes remained steady on the man behind the counter, the energy shifted again. It was as if the room had been waiting for someone to break the silence, to cut through the tension. And now that moment had arrived. Keanu's calmness was a sharp contrast to the anger that had filled the store just moments before. The people who had been whispering, sighing, and rolling their eyes now stood still, their guilt growing heavier as they realized what they had allowed to happen. The woman at the door clutched her bag tighter, her lips parting in surprise. She could not believe someone had actually stepped forward for her. She had been so used to bearing her struggles alone, and now in the most unexpected place, a stranger, no, not just any stranger, but Keanu Reeves was about to speak on her behalf. She felt her heart ache, but this time not from shame, from something gentler, something like hope. The store had become silent once more, but this silence was different. It was not heavy with tension, but with expectation. Everyone leaned slightly forward, waiting for the words that were about to be spoken. The air itself seemed to pause. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly. The cash register beeped once and then fell quiet. The world outside the doors carried on as usual, but inside everything was frozen, balanced on the edge of one simple moment. The store was so quiet that even the hum of the refrigerators in the back sounded louder than usual. Every customer was watching, their eyes fixed on the tall man standing at the counter. Keanu Reeves stood there with calmness written all over his face. He did not rush, he did not frown. He simply waited for the right moment. The cashier looked uneasy now, shifting from one foot to the other, the heat of his own outburst still clinging to the air. Keanu leaned slightly forward, not threatening, not aggressive, just enough so that his presence could not be ignored. His eyes were steady, his voice was gentle but clear, and when he finally spoke, his words cut through the silence like sunlight breaking through a dark cloud. "We all have bad days," he said softly, pausing just long enough for the words to sink in. "Let's not make hers worse." The sentence was simple, but it carried a weight far heavier than the shout that had come before it. His tone was not angry, not scolding, it was kind, firm, and full of understanding. He acknowledged the frustration in the room, the tiredness of the cashier, the impatience of the line, but he also reminded everyone that the woman's struggle was real, and she did not deserve cruelty on top of it. The words hung in the air for a moment, as if the store itself had stopped to listen. The cashier blinked, his face losing its hard expression. His shoulders dropped slightly, the anger draining out of him. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but no sound came out, because he knew deep down that Keanu was right. The truth of those words was undeniable. The customers behind him felt it too. Some looked down, ashamed of their own size, and whispers. A man who had been tapping his foot stopped suddenly, realizing how selfish his impatience had been. A mother with her children gave a small nod, her eyes softening. A teenager who had rolled his eyes earlier now stared at the ground. Embarrassed, the power of one gentle line had reached them all. The woman near the door froze. She turned slowly, her eyes wide in disbelief. She had expected to leave the store with nothing but shame. Yet now she saw someone had stood up for her. And not just anyone, but Keanu Reeves. Her lips trembled as she tried to hold back the tears that were finally breaking free. She clutched her bag tightly to her chest, her heart beating with a mix of surprise and relief. Keanu's face remained calm. He did not smile widely. He did not act dramatic. He simply stood there, his presence alone enough to change the entire room. His words were not just for the cashier, but for everyone watching, reminding them of something simple yet so often forgotten, that kindness costs nothing, and that patience can save someone from carrying unnecessary pain. The cashier finally swallowed, his throat tight. He gave a small nod. Though his pride made it difficult to speak, he mumbled something under his breath, an apology that was barely audible, but the shift in his tone was clear. His anger had melted away, replaced by guilt. He turned back to his register, his movements slower now, less harsh. The room felt lighter, as if the tension had finally cracked open and let fresh air in. The people in line relaxed too. The heaviness that had pressed on their chests began to lift. A few even smiled softly, moved by what they had just witnessed. They had expected another moment of conflict, but instead they had been given a lesson, delivered in the simplest way, by a man who chose kindness when it mattered most. The woman blinked back her tears, and for the first time since stepping into the store, she lifted her head. Her eyes met Keanu's from across the room, and though she could not find the words, her gratitude was written all over her face. She nodded slightly, her lips forming a silent thank you. He gave her a small nod in return. Nothing more, nothing less, but it was enough. It was a silent exchange that carried more meaning than any long speech could. The store slowly returned to motion, but it was not the same as before. The customers moved with a little more patience. The cashier handled the next items with a softer touch. The atmosphere that had been so tense and heavy now felt calmer. Warmer. It was as if one sentence had reset the entire room, reminding everyone that they were human, and that humanity mattered more than speed or convenience. The moment passed quickly, but the impact remained. The customers would carry it with them as they left, telling their families later about how one kind line had silenced a room. The woman would remember it every time she felt small or embarrassed, recalling that someone had once stood up for her in front of strangers. And the cashier too would think twice the next time he felt anger rise at a struggling customer, remembering the eyes of Keanu Reeves and the weight of those gentle words. And Keanu himself, he did not wait for applause. He did not look for recognition. He simply picked up his basket again, quietly taking his place back in the line as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everyone knew they had witnessed something rare, a simple act of compassion that had changed the course of an ordinary day. The words that Keanu spoke still floated in the air long after he had said them. "We all have bad days, let's not make hers worse." It was such a simple sentence, yet it had touched every heart in that room. The silence that had followed was not the same heavy silence from before. This one was softer, filled with reflection, almost peaceful. The cashier's angry energy had faded, replaced by quiet shame, and the people in line began to see the scene differently. A woman standing with 2 children gently stroked their hair, whispering to them that kindness mattered more than rushing. Her children looked up at her with wide eyes, and though they might not have fully understood, the lesson was planted deep in their minds. A businessman who had been checking his watch sighed deeply. Lowering his arm, he shook his head at himself. realizing how foolish it was to value a few minutes over another person's dignity. The teenager with headphones stared at the ground, remembering how he had rolled his eyes when the woman was counting coins. Now he wished he could take it back. His cheeks burned with guilt. He thought about how he might feel if his own mother were treated that way, and the thought made his chest tighten. Even the young boy who had asked his mother why the woman was taking so long now stayed quiet, watching carefully, realizing something important had just happened. The cashier avoided everyone's eyes. His earlier confidence and sharp tone were gone. He picked up items more slowly now, his hands no longer slamming them against the counter. His pride made it difficult to apologize fully, but his silence was enough to show he had been humbled. Deep down, he knew he would remember this day for a long time. The voice of Keanu Reeves, calm and firm, would echo in his mind whenever impatience began to creep in again. The woman who had been the target of all the frustration stood near the door, still holding her bag close to her chest. For the first time since she had entered the store, she felt seen, truly seen. Her lips trembled as she tried to smile, though tears still clung to the corners of her eyes. She wanted to say something, to thank him aloud, but her voice refused to come out. Instead, she let her eyes do the speaking. Filled with gratitude, relief, and a touch of disbelief, Keanu gave her a small nod, no more than that. But it was enough to let her know she was not alone. He did not act like a hero. He did not try to make the moment about himself. He simply returned to his place in the line, picking up his basket again as though nothing extraordinary had happened. That humility was what made the moment even more powerful. It was not about being famous, it was about being human. The people in the store began to whisper, but this time the whispers were different. They were not impatient complaints. They were soft words of respect, admiration, and even awe. Some whispered his name, others said things like, "He's right," or, "That was beautiful." The tension that had filled the room had dissolved into something warmer. Kinder? The energy of the store had shifted completely. Like a storm passing and leaving behind a clear sky, the woman finally turned and walked out of the store. Her steps still slow but no longer weighed down by humiliation. Each step felt lighter. Her heart, though bruised, now carried something stronger, a memory of kindness. She would replay that moment in her mind over and over again. Not the yelling, not the shame, but the words that had protected her when she felt most small. It was a moment she would never forget. Inside, the customers continued with their shopping, but their movements had changed. There was more patience in their eyes, more gentleness in the way they stood. A man let another person go ahead of him in the line. A woman smiled at the cashier softly, trying to break the awkwardness. Even the cashier himself gave smaller, almost apologetic nods to the next customers, as if silently promising to do better. The moment had touched everyone in some way, though each person would carry it differently. For some, it would be a story to tell their families at dinner. For others, it would be a private reminder to act with compassion. For the woman, it would be a memory she would treasure whenever life made her feel invisible. And for the cashier, it would be a lesson carved deep into his heart, reminding him that patience is always stronger than anger. Keanu stood quietly in the line, not seeking attention, not expecting praise. He knew the power of kindness was not in grand gestures, but in small ones spoken at the right moment. His words had already done their work. They had changed the entire atmosphere. He needed nothing more. The store around him returned to normal slowly, but in truth, nothing was truly the same. Every person there would leave with a story of a bad moment transformed into a good one by a single line. And as the minutes passed, the weight of that line continued to ripple through the store, like a stone dropped into water, sending circles outward, touching everyone who had witnessed it. That was the magic of kindness, simple but unforgettable. When the woman finally stepped outside the store, the cool air brushed against her face, and it felt like a gentle comfort after the storm she had just endured. She clutched her grocery bag close to her chest, her hand still trembling, but her heart carried something new. It was no longer only the weight of shame, it was also the warmth of kindness. She replayed the words in her head again and again. "We all have bad days. Let's not make hers worse," they echoed like a shield, protecting her from the harsh memory of being yelled at. For her, that single line had turned everything around. A moment that could have broken her spirit had instead reminded her that she still mattered, that there were still people in the world who cared. She walked slowly down the sidewalk, and though her eyes were still wet, she lifted her head a little higher. The humiliation was still there, but it was softened by the knowledge that she had not faced it alone. A stranger had stepped in not because he had to, but because it was the right thing to do. Inside the store, people continued with their shopping, but the atmosphere had changed permanently. It was no longer just a busy afternoon at a grocery store. It had become a memory that would stay with everyone who witnessed it. Customers picked their items more calmly, spoke more gently, and even smiled at one another. The energy of the place was lighter, as if Keanu's words had cleared away a cloud that had been hanging over them. The cashier, though embarrassed, felt a shift deep inside him too. He could not shake the sentence from his mind. It kept replaying in his head as he scanned the next items. We all have bad days. Let's not make hers worse. He realized that his frustration, though real, had spilled over unfairly, and he had made someone else's difficult day even harder. The sting of guilt would remain with him, but perhaps it would also change the way he treated people in the future. Maybe the next time a customer struggled, he would take a breath before raising his voice. Other customers whispered to each other. Some recognized Keanu Reeves and were amazed at his humility. Others, who had not known him, were simply struck by the power of his words. A mother told her children to remember what they had seen, that being kind was more important than being quick. A teenager promised himself silently that he would be more patient the next time he saw someone struggling. Little by little, the ripple of that one line spread wider. Keanu himself stood quietly. Holding his basket once more, he did not expect gratitude. He did not wait for applause. He simply acted because he believed kindness should never be silent. After paying for his groceries, he left the store without fuss, disappearing into the ordinary rhythm of the street outside. To him, it was just one moment, one chance to stand up for someone who could not. But for everyone else, it was unforgettable. The woman walked further down the street, her thoughts still circling around the experience. She thought about how close she had been to breaking down in front of strangers, and how one kind voice had saved her from collapsing completely. She thought about the faces in the store, some cruel, some indifferent, and one that had been gentle and strong. She knew she would carry that memory for the rest of her life. Whenever life grew heavy again, she would remind herself of those words. They would become a light for her, a reminder that compassion exists even in the darkest moments. The story of that day did not stay within the walls of the store. People who had witnessed it told others. First their families, then their friends. Soon it became one of those rare tales that traveled far, whispered, retold, and shared. The details changed slightly each time, but the heart of the story remained. A struggling woman, an impatient crowd, a cruel outburst, and one man who turned it all around with a single line. And that was the true power of it. Not that it happened in front of cameras or in the middle of some grand stage, but that it happened in the most ordinary place. A grocery store on an ordinary afternoon. It showed that kindness does not need a spotlight. It can live in the smallest of moments. It reminded everyone who heard it that compassion is not about wealth or fame. It is about choosing to care when it would be easier to stay silent. For the woman, it was more than just a story. It was a turning point. She walked home carrying not just bread and milk, but also a renewed sense of worth for the cashier. It was a lesson he would not forget. For the customers, it was a memory that would come back to them the next time they felt impatient. And for Keanu, it was just another quiet act of humanity, one of many he had lived by. That day in that small grocery store, the world had been reminded of something simple. A harsh word can break someone, but a kind word can build them back up. A crowd can stay silent, but one voice can change everything. And sometimes, the smallest actions are the ones that echo the loudest.